agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. Hey, Jay, how you doing?
Good. I don't have anything clever to say again.
That's fine. You'll have plenty of clever things to say in the course of the show. I am certain. How about that? That's a good way to kind of set you up. But anyway, so we're going to answer some. We've had a lot of listener comments, questions, critiques, what have you, and so we're going to just launch right into getting at some of them. If you're ready, Jay.
I'm ready.
Okay, let's do it. All right. First off, there is Seth who writes, "Hey guys. First, I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the recent episode with Will and Brian. I felt like they did a great job talking about both the academic arguments for the left and right, but also their personal arguments. And we appreciate that. Of course, I think Will and Brian have been a great team so far, and actually they will be on the show next week. So anyway, Seth has a question. He says, that said, that's always a problem. That said, I wanted to point out what I thought was a contradiction in their coverage of the Democratic field for president and the Mueller investigation / tax return issues. On one hand, when referring to the legal challenges faced by the Trump White House with Mueller and returns, they made a completely valid point that Democrats need, and indeed should, have policy differences with Trump as the highlight of their political efforts. However, when discussing candidates, and especially Vice President Biden, they moved to a discussion on electability. I'm curious as to how to define electability. In the discussion on the show, it seemed to focus on the concept that center-right voters could potentially vote for a Democrat. I'm sure the reverse is also true from the conservative side. I don't understand how clearly defining policy issues and the idea of electability match up. When reviewing recent one-term presidents and opponents they lost to, it seems clear to me that electability, at least defined by appeals to the middle, is a liability. And then Seth ends his email by providing some context to kind of support this claim. So it seems to me, Jay, that kind of the crux of what Seth is actually asking is, well, on the one hand, Democrats are saying we need to define ourselves in terms of our differences to Trump. And of course, I would say no one does that better than the most progressive Democrats, right? Sure. But on the other hand, there's this other school of thought that says, well, you need to find somebody who's electable, and that's not the people who define the differences the most, but it's these kind of centrist folks like establishment folks like a Joe Biden, basically, it seems to me. So what are your thoughts on this? And then I'll kind of chime in.
Well, I think, first of all, there's sort of, campaigns run in different phases, right? And in the primary phase, electability means one thing. And then, when it actually comes to it. So when I think it's a little weird in terms of because Trump, I don't know that Trump has any particular, I shouldn't say that because that's not quite true. But in terms of policy, Trump's not an idea guy, right?
No.
I mean, he's got
Except
a couple
on immigration and trade,
some of those kind of things, and even on trade, it's not necessarily an idea or ideology. It's more just he thinks this is a means to an end. It appears. In that it's sort of a not like a Reagan-Mondale matchup, but it's more voters are evaluating President Trump, which is the biggest issue for President Trump is, the Trumpism, right? The temperament, the craziness. So I think that's sort of, and if you match Biden up against Trump there, I think it probably works well. I think a lot of middle America will be, if they have not already, would be scared off by some of the policy prescriptions of the farther left of a Bernie Sanders, because look, those haven't been fully fleshed out in the media yet, but they will be, and I'm pretty confident when when those actual details of well, what does Medicare for all mean? What are these real numbers for free college? What does free college mean? How are you really going to pay for it? I think that would scare off a lot of middle class voters who may have tired of just the Trump craziness, right? The want the sort of return to normalcy. But that doesn't mean that they want democratic socialism or something else like that.
Yeah, and I largely agree with that. I think it's important, obviously, to emphasize differences with Donald Trump, especially when he's doing things that are, I would argue, just pretty awful. It's like saying I will release my tax returns and I will not be incredibly corrupt and that sort of thing.
Right, but that's not a policy issue.
No, you're right. That's a fair point. But I think also that we hear from a lot of people who are significantly to the left of me say, but I think this is really what the people want. And I would say, well, yeah, that's what people like you and maybe even I want in a regard. But I think that's a great recipe for building up really great margins in places that we're already going to win. So it's a great way to build up big majorities in coastal, in New York and California and other places. But I think it's also going to be a recipe for, a narrow electoral college victory for Donald Trump. I know there's a lot of talk about how Bernie Sanders is the candidate who's best equipped to deal. I've seen this from the progressive left to deal with Donald Trump. And I just think that's just flat out wrong. I mean, and you might say, well, that's just you coming at this as a centrist. Like, well, yeah, I guess it is, because I believe that centrism is the politically smart thing in a way, even though some of my instincts are maybe a little more toward a slightly more leftist type of view. I mean, you remember, Jay, when during the primaries when it was Bernie and Clinton, I got kind of on the Bernie bandwagon for a little while there with some things, but
in part, wasn't that also more a personal ethics / personality issue? And again, because Bernie, it wasn't so much people were interested in Bernie for the socialism, but it was, hey, he's not Hillary.
Yeah, and I think there was certainly part of that. But so, I mean, so to circle back to Seth's question, I think that in the end, that the Democrats are going to regret it if they nominate somebody who is considerably further to the left than kind of your median voter, and I think that's going to come back and hurt them. And I just want to remind folks that even though Hillary Clinton, for many reasons, was quite possibly the worst, one of the worst candidates the Democrats have nominated in quite some time, she actually did win more votes, considerably more votes, and came very close, 77,000 votes or something like that within various states of winning the election. So if a Hillary Clinton, who certainly was no radical leftist, could do it, I think somebody like a Hickenlooper or even Buttigieg is in a far better position than somebody who's considerably further to the left, like a Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And quite honestly, if I'm a Republican tactician, what I would say is I would much rather have the 2020 election be about a battle of ideas than a battle over the personality of Donald Trump.
Well, yeah,
because I think Republicans win on that idea question, and the Trump personality is a much more difficult campaign.
Well, at least if the candidate is, say, like a Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
So, well, let me ask you this, kind of in line with that. I think last week when I was doing the show, last week or the week before, when I was doing the show with Kristen, she mentioned that the candidate actually that she was most concerned about Trump facing, she thought would be the biggest challenge was Bernie Sanders. Now, you would disagree with that, right?
Yeah, I would.
So who would you say in the current field is the one who you say, oh man, that could be a rough matchup for the president? I
would think it'd probably be Biden.
Yeah. Well, I think Biden has his own kind of issues, but maybe that's another.
But here's the thing: those issues would not matter to the swing voters that we're talking about.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And let's put it this way: the far left would get over those issues in order to vote against Donald Trump.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right about that.
They would, and to the middle America voter, they would not. That would not move the needle, I don't think.
Yeah, I guess there's a part of me that maybe this is more of an emotional reaction, just saying like, geez, Joe Biden, like who's the oldest white guy we can nominate, in our party? It's like, oh God. So, but I think, and if I can kind of try to set that aside, I see your point on that. So, and I might be inclined to agree with you on that. And certainly we'll be talking a lot more about Joe Biden in the future. That's
yes, absolutely.
That's for sure. Anyway, on to our next question. Jessica writes, when Mike and Jay were talking about net neutrality, Mike kept on saying that Jay's position was outdated 20th century thinking. I'm for net neutrality, but saying that someone's thinking is outdated without explaining why it's outdated is, at best, an incomplete argument. Can Mike explain what he meant by outdated 20th century thinking? That's a fair question. Here's what I mean.
I should say I just want a hero of mine, a mentor of mine, was once described by an opponent as having one of the greatest minds of the 19th century. So I don't take I guess I don't take it personally if Mike says I'm accused of 20th century thinking, but
well, and just to refresh, Jay, could you just kind of briefly sketch out your argument against net neutrality? Because that's what I was reacting to, and just so in case people kind of came into this a little bit later, and you used an analogy to the postal service or other. Yeah. Can you just kind of briefly?
Well, the analogy I use a lot is that look, if you're talking about net neutrality, what it is if you're going to mail an item, if I'm going to mail a letter to Mike, I can do that with a 32-cent stamp, and it will get there in about a day or two. If I need to mail Mike something that is bigger, or I need to make sure it gets there the next day, I can pay a often significantly higher fee if you think about it, right? Even just a FedEx envelope or like $10-15, that's still 10-20 times what I would pay for a single stamp. But I can pay that, and I can make sure it gets where it needs to go when it needs to be there. Finally, if I need to ship a piece of furniture or something, Mike's a big workout guy. So if I got him a gift of a weight set, that would certainly cost more to ship because it's heavier, it's more stuff, and people would reasonably agree that that's not a crazy way to work this. That your payment for the transmission of this item is based on one, how soon you need it to be there, and how big it is, and that's sort of what it comes down to with net neutrality. If you have someone like Netflix or Amazon or a streaming service that is providing a whole ton of data that needs to get there right away, it's not unreasonable for the service provider to charge more to that service than they do to somebody else. So my argument essentially is look, if you allow that, what it's going to do is it's going to encourage those big providers and those service providers to spend more money on infrastructure, right? Because people are going to keep using more and more data. So they will spend the money to build more wires, more lines, so you can get your Netflix faster, and they can collect more on it. And that's a good thing. And I don't think that impacts your guy writing a blog in the basement, or two guys on a Saturday doing a podcast where you have a really not that same sort of bandwidth that you're using up.
Yeah, and what I was reacting to is basically what I call the 20th century thinking is that my sense of this is that what Jay is saying in many cases is he's looking at it in your first example of delivering whatever weights to me or something, is you have two things here. You have the product and you have the delivery mechanism. Now, right. If you send that weight set to me, and I could actually use some new extra 45-pound Olympic plates. But if you sent me, say, 2 45-pound Olympic plates, you could send them by like really slow mail, and say I get them in 2 weeks, or you could send them express overnight, and I get them in a day. But either way, I still have at the end the exact same product. that doesn't change at all. So you have the product and the delivery mechanism. My point was that in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases with the internet, the product and the delivery mechanism cannot be separated, because if you all of a sudden have slower delivery of, say, streaming video, that impacts the actual product. So it's not like you're getting the same thing, but just waiting longer. And so that's what I meant about that analogy falling apart at a certain point. Just to be
How does
clear.
I don't know how that analogy falls apart, because it's sort of okay. Let me put it this way. Let's do a different analogy rather than the weight set. Let's say, because in my business, lots of times I have to send time sensitive documents. That those documents, the speed of their delivery, their efficacy and their importance, their utility relies upon their arriving at a certain time. I mean, that would still be the same analogy then, right?
It certainly would be similar, but you still have that distinction between, once you have the product, it is a separate thing. Whereas when you're talking about, and a lot of the newer internet technologies and things that we're using it for, it requires a lot of bandwidth right away. And so if you say, well, we have this one video service that's well established and you can get 5K quality video right away, and a startup that wants to do the same thing, but it's not in the internet fast lane because there isn't net neutrality, all of a sudden that puts them at a huge competitive disadvantage and effectively can lock in existing monopolies, basically, and make development and competition much more difficult, especially for small entrepreneurs who are trying to get startups going. And that's the argument that I think.
I'd counter though that look, the whole idea is, if there's money to be made, there will be more companies that will enter competition. And especially if you're not going to regulate these providers like a utility, where you're sort of limiting the number of providers, you're going to get that competition.
Right. And what I'm saying is that and this is what the first FCC, the previous FCC said, is that in effect that we can have net neutrality because the providers are in effect utilities. And I think it's long overdue that we recognize, not through the FCC, but through law, that this is essentially a basic, almost essential public utility now and should be regulated as such. And I don't think really in the end it should be the FCC that's doing that. I think Congress should pass legislation to do that. And I think even though you disagree with that conclusion, you would probably agree with me that certainly it would be far better for Congress to do this as opposed to the FCC just going back and forth.
And I mean, that's my default position is typically I'd rather see something done by legislation than by rule.
Me too.
But as far as the utility, again, the problem you run into with utilities is that ends competition, and the utility gets to set the price and often becomes essentially rent seeking. And I think that is the greater threat to innovation and speeding up the internet and providing more service lanes than the idea that someone might have to. I mean, again, I don't. It's never. And I think you admitted this, that your reasons for being for net neutrality is because it would solve a problem that hasn't really occurred yet.
Right.
It could occur.
Yeah, right. Because right now, internet providers haven't set up slow and fast lanes and that sort of thing. Right. Exactly. It's a preemptive kind of thing to prevent the problem. Absolutely.
And my position would be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or if it becomes a problem, then we'll take it up then. But
okay. Let's move on. Let's see. Last week, last week, who's writing this question? I guess I should find out that. It's an anonymous person. No, it's somebody. Sorry about that. Shane wrote in and he said, last week, Trey and Ken talked about homelessness, specifically why so much money is being raised to rebuild Notre Dame when homelessness is much more important cause. And Shane wrote, oh my God, empty talking around homelessness. It shows the disconnect on the topic that has progressives upset. Clearly, they missed the point. I love you guys, I truly do, but the disconnect from the information that shows that fighting homelessness is good business and the basic human decency aspect as well. So it sounds to me like what Shane is saying is like, again, this issue of we raised all this money to rebuild a cathedral, but yet we can't deal with this problem of homelessness, which is a much more real and pressing and serious problem, a lot of people would say. And the point that Ken made on the show, for people who didn't catch that, was basically that, well, in part, rebuilding cathedral is a very well-bounded sort of thing. Has a clear start and end point. It doesn't require sort of an endless amount of money in that sense. You can say, well, we can do this for, say, $3 billion, and it can be done in 10 years, and then boom, the cathedral looks kind of like it did,
right.
Before it burned down.
I don't say this often, but Ken's absolutely right.
Yeah, but I think it gets into this, why aren't we then? The more fundamental question, I think Ken was right on that too, but the more fundamental question is, why aren't we doing more to deal with this very serious problem that, doesn't get the kind of dramatic attention that cathedrals, and, certainly a lot of us on the left would say, absolutely, we need to spend a lot more on this. We need to devote a lot more resource to this to make sure in the first place that people don't fall into homelessness. And that involves having a much more robust social safety net. And I certainly think we absolutely need that sort of thing, much more along the lines that we see in a lot of countries in Western Europe that have, perfectly fine and in many cases better economic growth than we do, better intergenerational mobility. And I think that is absolutely something we should be doing. And so if that's the point you're making, Shane, I absolutely agree. We need to do that. Jay, you maybe have a different view on that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, again, I'd say there is a human nature thing of when you're trying to raise money, charitable money, if you can tie it to a building, an event, a thing, you raise more money. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent, but I've served on the boards of a number of nonprofits for many years now, and that is the truth. All right. I mean, it's one of these crazy sort of things of, if you're trying to raise money because, hey, we need operational funds to keep the lights on and keep doing what we're doing, everybody's if you say, hey, we're going to build a new wing for this or that, the pocketbooks open up. It's just sort of a weird human nature sort of thing, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's one of the things, is it's easier, and part of it is the discreteness of it, right? And the knowing what you're paying for.
Sure.
I think that plays into it. So if the idea is, I'm going to pay to have Notre Dame refurbished, well then okay, you know what you're getting, and you can look up 10 years from now and say, I helped rebuild that. Something that, like homelessness, is just a lot more amorphous.
Right, which is why I think, and you've probably seen these things. Obviously, you get these appeals to say, help this specific child in Africa or someplace like that.
Send to the picture.
And you get letters and that sort of thing. And that, it personalizes in a way where it's saying, well, we're giving money on these people that you'll never see, all of a sudden have a place they can move into. That, it doesn't feel as, absolutely.
And again, homelessness is with something like a Notre Dame, or any sort of building, once you fix it, it's fixed. Yeah. And it stays fixed.
Yeah, exactly. Homelessness
is sort of a dynamic problem, and you can find people housing, but that doesn't mean they stay in it. And the reasons for Notre Dame was, well, it caught fire, and now we need to rebuild it. Reasons for homelessness, there are legion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's drug abuse and mental health issues, and all kinds of stuff.
Housing issues, you got income inequalities. Yeah, there's a zillion different variables there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one solution that might prevent or rescue someone from homelessness won't necessarily work for another person who's homeless.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the thing is look, rebuilding cathedrals that's an easy thing, and I don't think it's a improper thing to spend money on either, right? I mean, it's a treasure of Western civilization. You could make the same argument about, well, why should we support an art museum?
Sure.
Why shouldn't we support homelessness? Well, all right. I mean, that's sort of people can make their own decisions and know how they support it, but
yeah. No, I agree with that. Certainly, you go down that road, and all of a sudden, almost nobody's a good person. But maybe there are some utilitarian thinkers that would say, well, we just don't want to face up the fact that we're not at heart very good people, and we're spending money on things that we like and are pretty and meaningful to us, when other people are starving to death, and we just want to turn away from our lack of humanity. And that's at some level that's an argument that I think that has some resonance. I don't know.
Well, I think there's also, and I pointed this out in the Facebook thing. There's always, and to me, it's a little bit. I don't know. I bristle a little bit of look, billionaires step up and say, look, I want to spend some money to rebuild this church. And then a lot of other people who probably don't contribute nearly as much as these folks do, either in taxes or in direct charitable contributions, start criticizing their funding priorities. I think that's sort of, to me, it's kind of a none of your damn business,
sure.
right?
It's your money. You can do with it what you want, right? And my response would be, is like, that's the problem, is we need to tax you at a lot more progressive rate.
You need to take your money, exactly. And
well, I wouldn't put it that way.
Some people might equate being able to do what you want, make charitable contributions, what you want with your own money, as as an element of freedom.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Here's something from Scott. Scott has sort of a two-parter. You'll like this, Jay. Part one, let's start a contest, Scott says. Who will be the first indicted in the Obama spying scandal? McCabe is the logical choice. He's been the subject of a grand jury inquiry for a while. However, he doesn't have the name recognition that Comey has. So many choices. The evidence against Strzok and Page is deep. Maybe it will be a twofer. So I guess Scott would maybe want us to say who's going to be indicted here. And I would say, I don't think anyone's going to be indicted, but we'll see. And Jay, my view on this whole thing, and I've said this to Scott personally, but I'll say it here, is, I think that if there is credible evidence that the FBI or other law enforcement engaged in some sort of illegal activity against a presidential candidate and then the president, that is incredibly serious, and it should be investigated. And I know the Department of Justice's Inspector General is looking at that right now, and Barr says he's going to be looking at that. And if indictments come out of that, we absolutely will talk about that. But until that happens, I'm not willing to speculate based on media reports. That's kind of my take on that.
Okay.
And
I think it'll be McCabe.
Do you think that there will be indictments?
Listen, I think there is going to be a serious reckoning, and I just want to walk through this with you because, and this is something we haven't talked about, and for that very reason is we don't want to get into speculation or just going rumors, and Scott has been persistent in this, and rightfully so. But I think what we're looking at now, based on what we do know, is there seems to be a high likelihood that spying on a presidential campaign occurred. I think we sort of agree on that. The New York Times reported that the FBI sent an undercover agent to London to talk with Papadopoulos.
Yep.
That's sort of extraordinary. And again, the Barr's position is, spying occurred. It's up. I'm going to take a look to see if it was warranted. If this spying is based on the dossier, even primarily on the dossier, I think there's a big issue. And if we're concerned about Russian interference in our political system, the first place we should look to is the dossier, which was compiled by a former foreign intelligence officer from Russian sources. And let me just make the point that say what you will about Vladimir Putin, you'd agree with me that the guy runs a pretty tight ship.
Yeah,
right?
He does. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I think you'd also agree that, look, if Putin had the goods, had the U.S. president as his agent, whether willingly or just through compromise or something like that, that would be probably the intelligence bombshell of the century, if not of all of history.
Mm-hmm.
And you would also agree that Putin would probably be a kind of guy who would not let that information circulate to a wide range of people.
He would certainly try to keep that under his hat. Yeah.
And so to me, then, the idea that Christopher Steele could glean information about this bombshell from Russian sources
Well,
would
I see
one
what
or
you're
two
saying.
things. It would likely mean to me that um, those that leak was authorized by Putin. Because my sense is if you're leaking this kind of information about the
I see what
greatest
you're saying. And I
bombshell,
disagree.
you probably get a call from
Yeah.
HR or something
Yeah, I would
about it.
disagree in a sense because I guess on Putin, I would say he certainly is a repressive guy. But I think the extent to which any chief executive has just this total control. The idea that there aren't competing power structures and things like that, and folks with different motives within various levels of the Russian government, that Putin is this somehow all-seeing, all-knowing Oz in Russia is just simply a media creation. That Trump, that no leader has that kind of power, especially lead over of as large and fractious a country as Russia is. And so I guess I would disagree with that premise. Now, another thing you mentioned is this extraordinary, the things that the FBI did? There's no question that you want to use the word spying. Sure, spying occurred, and it was legally authorized as far as we know. Now, and Barr said as much, and this relates to another question that Dan wrote in asking about that report that you mentioned that was in the New York Times, I believe, on a few days ago about that Papadopoulos thing. So yeah, of course this is extraordinary, but we have to remember that the claim was also extraordinary, and that if you have credible evidence that that a major party nominee is somehow working with the Russians, well, what do you do with that? You just say, well, that seems pretty dangerous. We should probably just not deal with that because it could get us in trouble if no, you can't just, wouldn't you agree that if you're in charge of the FBI and someone gives you evidence that makes it look like, hey, this could be going on, that you have to do something?
Yeah, but I think the proper thing and one of the first things to do, and this is something we haven't seen, and I'm not saying we should have necessarily seen it. If the administration knew that the Russians were interfering in the election, why didn't we take other counterintelligence steps? Why was it aimed at Trump and not at the Russians, right? Or why wasn't there some sort of
well, I think a lot of the stuff was aimed at the Russian. Certainly, at least based on on the Mueller report, most of the indictments I think were against
sure.
Russians and so forth. So I think
that was for like the Facebook meme or the farm kind of thing, which is kind of peanuts.
I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that entirely. But I guess this is why, right? We haven't talked about this a whole lot because now we're getting very much into the realm of speculation. But I can assure Scott and everyone that when reports come out and when we actually have solid information, we'll definitely talk about this. So
okay. I want to throw one more piece in because to me this isn't speculation. This is more a matter of deduction. Russian lawyer, the lovely Natalia Veselnitskaya. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Who participated in the Trump Tower meeting. She was also affiliated with Fusion GPS, correct? There's no dispute that. So Fusion GPS, the people who published the dossier releasing the biggest state secret ever, and they also have someone who is close. She's described as being close with Putin. She participates, works with them in releasing this biggest state secret ever. How is she still alive?
Yeah, right? This is why I won't. This is why I don't want to go down this road because all right. You're starting to sound like Michael Moore. And so this is where I sort of check out on these things.
All right. But, well, we will wait, but that's just sort of my
sure.
My deduction based on
you call it deduction, I call it cherry picking.
Came from and who controlled the information.
You call it deduction, I'll call it for now argument by innuendo. That is your logical fallacy, I will say. Anyway,
innuendo that Putin is
yeah. Okay. All right. The second part, there was a second part to Scott's question about the all this impeachment talk. He said, "Do you guys think this is bad for the country?" I listened to some old clips of the mainstream media about the Clinton impeachment. And they seem to be reporting that it was a bad idea and that impeachment should be an extraordinary remedy to address an imminent danger or an especially egregious violation of the law. Do you think we're there? I'm very concerned about how flippant the MSM and Democrat politicians are at throwing that term around and that it will instill in the minds of Americans that we can use the impeachment process as some kind of recall vote when we don't like the outcome of an election. So what do you think, Jay?
I think Scott, I would say amen to that. Yeah. I mean that's exactly right. That's sort of my concern, is that are we now entering into an age where this is just a matter of we impeach presidents we don't like?
Yeah, and I would agree with the basic concern that we have to be very, and I've said this, Jay, a number of times on the show, that it's a very serious thing to have just Congress overturn the results of the Democratic election. But I think that we should be very wary of normalizing impeachment as kind of a political tool.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I would say that Donald Trump, his disregard for democratic norms isn't ordinary, and it is in fact, extraordinary. I would say that was also the case when it came to Richard Nixon. I don't think it was the case when it came to Bill Clinton, certainly. But so I understand the worry, but I don't really think that it is necessary. I mean, I think that Donald Trump is an extraordinarily not say bad president, doesn't really quite capture it, but I don't think that impeachment talk is out of line. And I certainly think it
If
could
you
be,
really, really don't like him, yes.
has
then it's
nothing to
okay.
do with it. No, because liking or not liking his policies or thinking he's a disgusting human being or not, no, it's the contempt he has for the rule of law, which I think is the bigger problem. And I would feel that way about any president who had that sort of contempt for the truth and rule of law. And so that to me is a very different thing.
Okay, I would say, look, the Constitution allows impeachment for high crimes and misdemeanors. In the case of Nixon, there was a credible obstruction of justice, being an unindicted co-conspirator to obstruct justice by essentially firing people who for reasons to prevent things from coming back on his campaign. And it's not just for violating democratic norms. And with
Sure.
Clinton, the high crime and misdemeanor was essentially perjury to a federal court in an ongoing court proceeding, which that fits the definition. I mean,
Sure.
it's a felony. And with Trump at this point, what we have is
We have
no high
plenty of
crime and misdemeanor
evidence.
that's been put out there yet. No collusion. And sort of a no finding on obstruction of justice. So.
Plenty of evidence that Mueller basically teed up and said to Congress, here, there's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to. But we've already talked about that. But there's plenty there, certainly, I would say. Also, one of the charges against Nixon, of course, was contempt of Congress, and I think that's potentially a charge.
Yeah, that's not going to. Here's the thing, though. You're never going to. Let's put it this way. If contempt of Congress is a high crime and misdemeanor, then impeachment means nothing. Impeachment essentially means a failure to,
Yeah, but high crimes and misdemeanors is whatever Congress decides. I mean, this is a political determination.
But again, you get in sort of a closed loop there. That if Congress says jump and the president doesn't jump as high as Congress wishes, well, we'll impeach you.
And if you have the votes,
that would essentially give Congress absolute impeachment power for anything that they just don't like, and
they have it now.
That's not the Constitution.
They have it now. I mean, all it requires is there's no recourse. That Donald Trump has said that if he were impeached, he would take it to the Supreme Court, which is a nonsensical thing. But that's okay because his Twitter comments are often nonsensical things, and they're not really designed to make logical sense. There's no recourse to an impeachment and conviction vote. There's nothing that a president who's impeached and convicted can do. And so it's really up to Congress, the House and the Senate, to decide, does this rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors? As you point out in many other issues, well, what's the remedy for that? The remedy for that's the ballot box.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's right. But I think the farther out on the limb Congress goes, and if they define a high crime and misdemeanor as not doing what we want, that's a very tough political sell.
Yeah, and
I think you can make a really good constitutional argument that at that point you no longer have three co-equal branches.
Sure, maybe at that point, but it seems to me there's no evidence that Congress really is seriously considering that, especially in this case when there's plenty of feasible strong evidence that that the president has done things that would fit into the category of high crimes and misdemeanors for any reasonable person.
Okay.
All right.
But yet did not rise to the level of the special counsel who looked at it. Didn't think they were.
Well, actually, he did think they were. He just, but that's another issue.
Right.
You're mischaracterizing, I would say. But anyway,
just like Bill Barr.
Just like Bill. Yes, exactly. Just like Bill Barr. Absolutely, Jay. All right. Seth writes, "Hey guys, in the most recent Wednesday show, Mike and not anymore. Most recent. Sorry, it's been a couple of weeks. Mike and Jay both discussed passing a law requiring major party candidates to release 10 years of tax returns. Both seem to think this was a good idea. Well, I don't. Since there wasn't anyone to present an opposing opinion, I thought I would offer mine.
All right.
Yeah, this such law requires the belief that voters are effectively too disinterested, perhaps stupid, to realize the potential pitfalls of electing a person who refuses to release returns. To the contrary, candidate Trump's refusal to release his tax returns was well known and covered at length. Yet voters still chose him. They made an informed decision. Would they have made a different choice had they seen the returns? Possibly, but they knew they weren't going to see them, accepted that, and voted for him. To me, that's the democratic way to approach this issue. I should be able to vote for whomever I choose, provided they meet the standards set forth in the Constitution. This is also my argument against term limits. The only things that get limited with term limits are the voters who can't vote for their incumbents. I just don't think that as many barriers as possible should be removed and or not built between the voters and who they are willing to elect." So what do you think, Jay?
Well, I think he's not wrong.
So then are you changing your position then?
I'm not sure. What was my position before? He said
You
that
actually-
I agree with that. I think my position was probably like, look, I wouldn't oppose something like that, but I don't know that it's necessary, right? I think you would see the necessity for it. And I think my position was something, well, if something like that passed,
Well, and I guess I would say that I have less faith in the public, and not so much necessarily in their intelligence, but in their focus than Seth does. You know, his argument, and this is the Trump argument too, is that the public decided they didn't care about this. I'd say,
the Democrats certainly tried to focus their attention on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there was just nothing to see there because he refused to release them. And I would say that oftentimes there are tons of things going on behind the scenes that people don't necessarily think are a big deal until all of a sudden the evidence is presented to them. And that's not because people are stupid. It's because people have lives and other things are going on and that sort of thing. And so oftentimes I think the public needs to be shown these things, and just saying that, well, if the public cared about transparency, they would demand transparency. I don't buy that argument, essentially. And so I think sometimes that it's important to mandate a certain amount of transparency. And in this case, this is one of these instances. Past presidents have sort of understood that this is, a good thing to do. Now Donald Trump broke this norm, and I very much support a law saying that all major party presidential nominees will release 10 years of their tax returns. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sort of.
Has Seth convinced you?
I'm coming around to Seth's position. I think that's, yeah.
But again, I think, to me, this is part of my whole critique of the whole kind of conservative / libertarian view of human nature as these
just vote for who you want.
No, as these rational decision makers unencumbered by anything. And I think, that's just not how people are in the real world, and people are under various pressures, and people just can't necessarily parse all this stuff and take all the time that we do, and people need to be helped out, to be shown some of these things, and then they can make up their minds. And so, saying, oh, well, people have this ability to choose. It's easy to say from our positions of privilege, but oftentimes that's just not the case in reality.
Oh dear. No, I would just say, look, I think Seth is right in that there's a rule that a court essentially that, look, if somebody's refuses to provide evidence, you're allowed to make the impute that evidence is not favorable to them. So the Democrats have and did, and they made that case, and they said, look, Trump is probably on the payroll of all these foreign governments. He's probably cheating on his taxes, and the fact that he won't show you just proves it. They made that argument at length, and I mean, my thought is I think it's a better idea to release your tax returns just because you avoided that argument and having to do it. But he chose otherwise, and yeah, I mean,
yeah, and I think just from a policy perspective, it makes a lot of sense because there are potentials for conflicts of interest and so forth, and so I think people that should be public record basically. And
let me ask you this: though, what else should be mandated of a presidential candidate in terms of disclosure? If you're going to mandate 10 years of tax returns, what else would you require that a candidate disclose?
Okay, here's the slippery slope. I would say it's limited to two things. I would say independent medical reports, and I would say the tax returns.
Okay. Well, I mean, independent medical reports.
That means that they don't get to choose their doctor to do their physical. Basically, I would say, you have the Trump's guy saying, doctor, "Oh my God, yes. he's like an Avenger practically. He's so tough and cool, and all that sort." So those are the two things that I say. That sort of hidden information that can make a real difference. And I've this is kind of going off on a tangent, but I don't care. But yeah, I've raised concerns about all the septuagenarians we have running for president.
Right, and your age, I think, was the gist that I gleaned from the Facebook post. But yes,
from what? Oh yeah,
from the Facebook post.
But
yes,
no, because I mean, certainly, this is a very serious concern to me because, of course, we know now, right, that in the second Reagan term, that according to a lot of reports, he was maybe showing some signs of the Alzheimer's that later, ended, that he later contracted in full-blown form. And this matters a lot. The presidency is an incredibly demanding job in a lot of ways. And so I want to know, I think it's important for voters to know that the person who's running for that job is physically, mentally up to that task. And also that, they don't have these kind of conflicts. And so I think that should be part of the public record and be part of the deliberations, the information that people have available to them.
How about then the mandatory cognitive testing and also 50-yard dash?
Well, obviously you can take it to the point of ridiculousness, but again, your logical fallacy here is a slippery slope argument. What's reasonable and what's not? I think certainly that can be decided through the legislative process. And you push stuff that's not reasonable, well, it won't make its way through the process. But I can make, I think, a very strong case, I think I have, that some basic health results and some financial disclosure is reasonable. And of course, there is basic financial disclosure forms that all candidates have to file right now.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, on that note, we will wrap things up. Thanks, everyone, for listening to us today. And, if you want to get in touch with us, it's really simple to do. Maybe you want to be featured on a future show. It's mail@politicsguys.com. You can also comment on our Facebook page, and that's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We are also on Twitter @politicsguys. And hey, if you are able and willing to support the show financially, that would be great. To do that, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys or politicsguys.com/support. And if you can't support the show, also, if you could just subscribe, and you can do that really easily through whatever app you're listening to, and share the show with your friends, neighbors, whoever, really, that we would appreciate it. And we would appreciate it. Geez, Jay, it's already been a long day. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Anyway, we do appreciate it, and we'll end with that. The executive producer of the Politics Guys, Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, and Benji Fishman. Today's show produced by Michael Baranowski and Jay Carson. We will be back with a new midweek show, next Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
How much fun would a 50-yard dash push-up contest / presidential combine be?
Oh my God, that would be...
If we were to do that way, right?
That would be awesome. Saying. Yeah, absolutely. I guess this is like our little kind of like the Avengers movie. They did a little thing after the credits. So this is
exactly. This is
after the credits here. Now maybe we'll eat shawarma one day. Anyway, okay. Well, that does it for today. Thanks, everyone.